You're watching CNN. I'm Allison Cossack in New York. Let's start with the main news from Ukraine. And Russia says nearly 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have surrendered at the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol since Monday. CNN can't confirm the Russian tally. Most of the soldiers appear to have been taken to Russian-controlled territory. A new report from Human Rights Watch details numerous alleged crimes by Russian forces against civilians in the Kyiv and Chernihiv regions of northern Ukraine. Among them, 22 apparent summary executions, 9 other unlawful killings, 6 possible enforced disappearances, and 7 cases of torture. It's believed the crimes were carried out from late February through March, when Russian troops controlled much of the area. Some Ukrainian civilians interviewed by the group also described being held in inhumane and degrading conditions with little or no food or water. Meantime, in Kyiv, the first Russian war crimes trial since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has begun. A 21-year-old Russian soldier is accused of killing a 62-year-old man in Ukraine's Sumy region. That's according to Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office. He has pleaded guilty. CNN correspondent Melissa Bell is outside the courthouse in Kyiv, and she joins us live now. Melissa, great to see you. I understand that court has adjourned early. Why did that happen, and what happened before the session ended?
Well, extraordinary scenes here today at this Kyiv courthouse. It is, of course, as you reminded our viewers, the scene of the first war crimes trial being held in Ukraine since the war began. On trial, 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin, who's accused of having killed an unarmed civilian on the 4th day of the war. After his convoy got hit, he and other Russian soldiers got into a car to try and escape and killed this civilian for fear that he might denounce them to Ukrainian authorities. Now, that is what he's accused of. As you say, the proceedings just adjourned. I don't know if you can see behind me the considerable media presence here, and that is because there were simply too many journalists packed into what is a very small courtroom. So things will pick up again tomorrow. The hearing is postponed to tomorrow. But we did find out one extremely interesting thing in the proceedings that have taken place so far, and that is that we're not only going to be hearing, as we did begin to, from Vadim Shishimarin this morning, we're not only going to hear from him, but we're also going to be hearing from another Russian prisoner that is that we're going to be hearing testimony from, being called by the prosecution, who was traveling in the car with Vadim Shishimarin at the time. So we should learn by tomorrow a lot more about exactly what went on. But we're going to be hearing from not one, but 2 Russian prisoners of war. And I think that is significant and something that we've only learned this morning.
Okay, Melissa Bell, live for us in Kyiv. Thanks so much. Finland and Sweden have officially handed in their applications to join the NATO alliance. Their leaders were received by Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in Brussels earlier today. The decision was spurred by Russia's war on Ukraine, and it marks a major shift for 2 countries that have remained neutral for decades.
Every nation has the right to choose its own path. You have both made your choice after thorough democratic processes. And I warmly welcome the requests by Finland and Sweden to join NATO. You are our closest partners, and your membership in NATO would increase our shared security.
The European Commission is proposing to speed up the EU's transition to renewable energy to help end reliance on fossil fuels from Russia. It's planning to invest an extra $220 billion to increase renewable power capacity, saying green energy sources should account for 45% of EU output by 2030. Anna Stewart joins us now with more. So what is the EU's plan here to kind of wean itself off of Russian energy from being so dependent on Russia's oil and gas?
Well, this was a really comprehensive package, and that is a big acceleration, that figure for renewable energy by 2030 from what it had before. It comes, as you said, though, with a big price tag, $220 billion. Ultimately, though, it believes this plan would save the bloc longer term, around $100 billion a year, because that's roughly how much it spends on fossil fuels and largely, of course, from Russia. Now, the plan is very comprehensive. Part of this, will, particularly in the short term, will be just replacing some of the natural gas from Russia with liquefied gas from elsewhere. That'll help it reduce its reliance, certainly this year, by 2/3 when we're talking about Russia. Longer term, though, it is all about greener energies, and it's got a lot of different plans in this package. For instance, it wants to speed up the process of greenlighting new energy projects, making it easier and quicker. He wants to ensure that any new public building built in the EU has solar roof panels by 2025. Important to note, though, that while this is a really ambitious plan with great ideas on infrastructure to help wean itself off Russian energy, it will require the approval of all 27 member states. And not just the approval, Alison, but also implementation, because it's not just money coming from the EU. This will take action from all member states.
And some strength, because it's certainly not easy to wean off being so dependent on Russian energy sources. You know, for now, the EU is reliant on Russian gas, and it risks being cut off from that if it doesn't bend to President Putin's demands for payments to be made in rubles. What more are you learning about that?
Well, if anything, the situation on that front is getting more confusing. Now, yesterday we had guidance at last from the EU, and it seems to contradict actually some of the guidance they gave last week. Now, at the heart of this issue is, can EU energy suppliers pay for their gas using both a euro account with Gazprom Bank and a euro account? So can they pay in euros to Gazprom Bank, have that money in Russia by a Russian entity converted into rubles, and for that to pay for the energy? Would that be a breach of sanctions? At the end of last week, it appeared the EU was leaning towards the idea that it wouldn't be, and that just by sending euros to Russia would fulfill the contract, that payment would be done. As of last night, the suggestion is that setting up any kind of ruble account with Gazprom Bank would be a breach of sanctions. This leaves these energy importers in quite a pickle as to what to do now. We believe quite a few of them have set up both euro accounts and ruble accounts with Gazprom Bank at this stage. We know, for instance, Eni in Italy has done that. They said they did that yesterday as a precautionary measure. But it's coming down to the wire. Some of these contracts are due to be paid. Some countries, like Finland, their big gas importer there, has said they will not play ball with this. They simply refuse to pay in euros and have it converted to rubles. They refuse to bow to President Putin's decree. They expect or warn that they could be cut off from Russian gas this weekend. That has already happened from Poland, for Bulgaria. But for a country like Sweden, natural gas accounts for just 6% of their overall energy mix. For other member states in the EU, they can't afford to take this stance. So really, we're looking for more guidance, perhaps some compromise, and definitely more clarity from the EU on whether these suppliers can pay for their gas using euros that gets converted into rubles. Alison?
Okay, Anna Stewart, thanks for all of that great reporting. Here in the U.S., business chiefs are increasingly bracing for a recession. A survey by the Conference Board think tank finds that nearly 70% of CEOs expect the Federal Reserve's efforts to tame inflation will eventually trigger a recession. Matt Egan joins us now with the details. Matt, good to see you. So I'm wondering, what did the CEOs detail in this survey? What were they pointing to say a recession is definitely coming?
Well, Alison, this survey revealed a surprising amount of gloom and doom from the C-suite. CEO confidence is at the lowest level since the start of the pandemic. 60% of CEOs anticipate that economic conditions are going to get worse. That's up from just 23% who said that last quarter. And 68% expect that the Federal Reserve's war on inflation is going to eventually tip the economy into recession. Now, I think two important caveats there. One, just 11% of CEOs expect a so-called hard landing, which would be marked by a deep recession. The rest are actually expecting a mild and short recession, and they're not necessarily anticipating an imminent recession. The survey did not really specify when the downturn would begin, merely describing it as something over the next few years. Now, this is really all about concerns about the worker shortage, rising input costs, and just how high inflation is right now and what the Federal Reserve is going to have to do to get it back under control. It is striking to hear this level of pessimism from business leaders, especially because this economic expansion is barely 2 years old. And there are a lot of bright spots. Unemployment is at a COVID low. Headcount, U.S. payrolls, they're almost back to pre-crisis levels. Retail sales are growing really fast, but all of that is being overshadowed by high inflation. And, I sort of wonder if this survey raises the specter of a self-fulfilling prophecy where business leaders, they start to hunker down, they spend less because they're worried about inflation and worried about a recession, and that actually brings about the recession. I just want to read you a key quote from Dana Peterson, the chief economist over at the Conference Board, and she told me, "You can always talk yourself into a recession. If businesses start shedding jobs in anticipation of a recession, that is going to spook consumers, and that can get us into a recession." So, Allison, it feels like everyone is very negative right now. Clearly, CEOs are negative. Consumer sentiment is at the lowest level in more than a decade. Investors are negative. Whether or not this is overdone, I don't know. I guess we'll find out pretty soon.
You know what? I've talked with analysts and I've talked with economists like Mohammed El-Arian who think there won't be a recession. So then there is that side of it as well. Matt Egan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
These are the stories making headlines around the world. Black box data recovered from a China Eastern flight that crashed in March suggests someone in the cockpit intentionally downed the plane. That's according to a Wall Street Journal report citing a preliminary assessment by U.S. officials. All 132 passengers and crew died after the plane nosedived from 29,000 feet. CNN Beijing Bureau Chief Stephen Chang has more.
Even before the Wall Street Journal story was published, there had been a lot of speculations on Chinese internet about this crash being caused by pilot suicide because, as many experts have pointed out, a mature aircraft type like the Boeing 737-800 simply doesn't fall out of the sky. Now, Chinese officials had previously strongly denied those so-called rumors, but after the journal article was published, we have seen the airline industry regulator here, CAAC, issue a statement to state media basically saying they have reached out to their American counterparts at the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, and what the Americans have told the Chinese, according to CAAC, was that they have not released information about the investigation to any media outlets. So notice how carefully worded both sides have been. Neither the Americans nor the Chinese have directly denied the crux of the journal report, which was this deadly crash was caused by human inputs from the cockpit. Now, analysts and the observers have also pointed out to some hints and suggestions that the Chinese authorities may be concerned about, if not aware of the human factors involved in this crash, because on April 6th, just a few weeks after this crash, the CAAC authorities held a nationwide conference on air safety with the Minister of Civil Aviation, actually urging officials across the country to pay particular attention to pilots' state of mind, saying all frontline employees, but especially pilots, need to be physically and mentally fit to fly to ensure the safety of the entire industry. And other observers have also pointed out to the fact that the 737-800 series continues to be operated by Chinese airlines after the crash as another sign that this crash was not caused by mechanical or technical failures. Even China Eastern itself, after suspending commercial services of the aircraft type for a brief period of time, has resumed flying this very popular aircraft across China. Stephen Zhang, CNN, Beijing.
U.S. soccer has just reached a landmark agreement. For the first time ever, men and women playing for U.S. national teams will get equal pay and prize money for international matches. The deal comes after years of bitter legal battles and contract disputes. It runs through 2028, covering the next 2 World Cups each for men and women, too. Still ahead, a market in meltdown, investors who say they face ruin. We'll ask if crypto can ever fully recover. And not so free as a bird, with Elon Musk's Twitter deal still on hold, hear what the company's board is now saying. Welcome back. I'm Allison Cossack. New losses for Bitcoin this morning after a turbulent 2 weeks for crypto investors. As we have been reporting, the values of Terra and Luna, which were promoted as so-called stablecoins, dropped as much as 99% in just days. Some investors say it's ruined them financially and even have spoken about suicide. Let's talk with Juthika Chow. She is the head of OTC options trading at the crypto exchange Kraken. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Juthika, it has been a really scary ride for a lot of crypto investors recently. You know, we saw a lot of fear in the crypto markets. I'm curious what you're seeing at Kraken. Are customers panic selling?
Well, I think we definitely saw selling over the last couple of weeks, which is what has contributed to the price action, partly due to the broader market and the growth concerns with the Fed stemming inflation, and then obviously partly due to crypto-specific factors. But I would say among our client base, there's not really panic per se. A lot of customers have been in crypto for a while and have been through multiple cycles, have seen multiple crashes, even dating back to just recently in March 2020 and then May 2021. So this isn't the first time we've seen a volatile environment. And I think many of our customers have braced for it and have prepared for it from a risk point of view.
For Bitcoin, though, you know, volatility, it's expected. But are you sensing that there's anything different about this kind of moment or cycle of volatility? And what do you see in the short term for Bitcoin? Is there any recovery for it? I mean, gone are the days, it seems, of $100,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year.
Well, I think what's different this time around is how much it's tied to the broader market. So I've been in Bitcoin for a while, and if I look at prior cycles, the volatility was usually specific to Bitcoin factors. For example, China banning Bitcoin, or when we had the Mt. Gox hack in 2014. But this is the first time that a lot of the volatility is actually driven by what's happening in the broader market with the NASDAQ, with tech stocks. And I think part of that is due to the institutionalization of Bitcoin, where you have more funds and institutions that are investing both in traditional assets as well as Bitcoin. And so I think it goes both ways in terms of that's obviously very good for Bitcoin and adoption, but it does contribute when you get broader market volatility that contributes to Bitcoin volatility. I think as we move from being more risk off right now, which is the current nature of the environment, to being more risk on, we will see investors disproportionately invest back into Bitcoin, particularly as they start thinking about what assets to own as an inflation hedge.
One of your competitors, Coinbase, recently said if it went bankrupt, its users could lose all the crypto in their accounts. What do you make of that, and can the same thing happen at Kraken?
Well, I can't really speak to Coinbase's comments, and I think a lot of times they're just legal restrictions that you have to put and disclaimers that you have to put. But ultimately, they're just questions around custody and holding crypto and custody as an exchange. And a lot of the fiduciary obligations that we have as custodians, we obviously take those very seriously, and I'm sure Coinbase does too. I think folks within the space, there wasn't really much surprising. It was just kind of nitpicking some legal language out of the 10K or 10Q.
Maybe it wasn't so surprising to you. You live and breathe this stuff, but oftentimes a lot of these investors who get into crypto, they don't read the finer points. So what's your suggestion then for people who, let's say, have crypto, you know, let's say they're invested with you. Is it better to put it in a wallet? Is it safer there, and is it tradable as well?
So I think there are trade-offs when it comes to custody. And so the two main questions are, do you want to hold your own private keys, your own passwords, or do you want to entrust a third-party custodian with it? And I think both answers are equally valid depending on people's risk appetites and their where they kind of fall in the spectrum. So a lot of times a custodian might be more safe and more efficient for you to manage. You don't have to worry about the headaches, but obviously you are entrusting a third party with custody risk. Some folks prefer to have the control of having their own private keys, but ultimately then the responsibility lies with them. And if they forget their passwords or their seeds, or if they lose it, then there's really no help coming, and they would have lost their Bitcoin. And so it really varies depending on individual appetite, but I think both are equally valid approaches for individuals.
Well, Juthika, thank you so much for all that great information. I'm sure those who are playing with Bitcoin these days will appreciate that. Juthika Chow, thanks so much for your time. El Salvador is facing tens of millions of dollars in losses on crypto. Last year, it became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. But the president also invested $100 million in Bitcoin before the price plunged. Rafael Romo has more on that and the wider economic concerns. Rafael, what are you seeing?
Hi, Allison. Well, since early November, when Bitcoin was at its peak, the cryptocurrency has gone down by a whopping 56%. This morning, it's worth less than $30,000 when it reached nearly $68,000 back then. For El Salvador, the problem is not only the purported loss of tens of millions of dollars, but also the fact that credit rating agencies have downgraded the country, which will make it difficult to get any loans for government projects. It was flashy, loud, and colorful. The special effects rivaled those of a rock concert. That's how El Presidente made his grand entrance, greeting everybody in English. No old-fashioned suit or tie needed.
We demonstrated that Bitcoin could do a lot of good things.
Nayib Bukele, the 40-year-old millennial president of El Salvador, told the crowd he's making his Central American nation of 6.5 million a Bitcoin nation. That was back in November, when the market cap for cryptocurrency hit $3 trillion. Bukele started promoting Bitcoin during the summer.
This will generate jobs and help provide financial inclusion to thousands outside the formal economy.
And in September, El Salvador became the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender alongside the US dollar. 2 months later, the president announced plans to build a city where Bitcoin would reign supreme. But not everyone has jumped on the Bitcoin bandwagon.
It's supposed to be the currency right now, Bitcoin, but people are not using it. It's mostly, businesses, international businesses like Starbucks, like McDonald's that are accepting Bitcoin because, they don't want to be at default with the policies of the government.
And the government has gone all in, buying up more than 2,300 Bitcoins since September to the tune of more than $103 million. The problem is that in the same period, the cryptocurrency has lost more than 35% of its value, meaning the Salvadoran taxpayers are tens of millions of dollars in the red thanks to their president's investment strategy. The president's answer? Buy the dip, words he has posted multiple times on Twitter.
For an investor, for an individual investor, it may make sense, right, to say buy the dip, but the problem for a country, the risk is way bigger, and we don't know if this is the dip.
Georgia University business professor Julio Sevilla says the risk goes beyond losing money.
Their own bond market has also suffered a lot. It's up there with Ukraine on the riskier bonds perceived as countries, and Ukraine, it's in a war that they didn't induce. El Salvador is getting into this risk voluntarily.
On the one hand, El Salvador is making a risky investment. On the other, the small Central American country is counting on help from the International Monetary Fund to repay government bonds worth $800 million. The bonds are due in January, and this burden is in addition to other financial obligations. How big is the risk of default?
If the president keeps on buying as Bitcoin goes down, I think the risk of default may be larger because at some point the IMF is going to say, no, we cannot loan you money, you're not doing things the right way.
Sevilla says he still expects El Salvador to get financing, but if its president continues to double down on risky investments, he says default is a very real possibility, and Bukele's dream of making his country a Bitcoin nation could become a mirage. And two credit rating agencies, Fitch and Moody's, have downgraded El Salvador so far this year in part because of the risk associated with Bitcoin purchases. And according to an analysis by Bloomberg, El Salvador's Bitcoin losses are roughly equal to its next bond payment of $38 million due in mid-June. Allison, back to you.
All right, Rafael Romo, thanks so much. Still to come, Ukraine's only national postal service is still making deliveries amid the war. I'll be talking with the service's director about its new stamp and how their work has changed during the war. That's after the break. Welcome back. I'm Allison Cossack. That was the opening bell, and U.S. markets are up and running. And it looks like stocks are lower to start the day, a day after we saw some strong gains in the market. In an interview yesterday, Fed Chair Jay Powell said the central bank will not hesitate to raise interest rates to tame inflation. This as rising costs are weighing on some company earnings. Shares of Target are falling sharply after its first quarter profit missed expectations. The company blames high costs and supply chain problems. Meantime, shares of Lowe's are also down after its sales missed its estimates. The company says cooler spring weather hurt demand for seasonal goods. A failed river crossing turned into a graveyard of Russian tanks. CNN's Sam Kiley reports from the scene of one of Russia's worst defeats in Ukraine.
The first signs of a Russian disaster, a Z-marked Russian tank being salvaged by Ukrainian troops. A few days ago, this was the scene on the edge of these woods, Russian pontoon bridges under ferocious Ukrainian artillery attack. The Ukrainian commander with us casts an eye to the sky looking for Russian drones. This is no place for complacency. Ukraine and NATO have claimed that Russia suffered badly here. They estimate 70 to 80 vehicles destroyed and a whole Russian battle group of 1,000 men mauled.
So we're at the edge now of the area where the Russian armour was caught after it had crossed the pontoon river. You can see down here there's a destroyed tank, next to it an armoured personnel carrier, and if we look down the road here, we've got another armoured personnel carrier and another and another. The Ukrainians were able, they say, due to their superior reconnaissance and intelligence, to work out where the Russians were going to cross and then bring in devastating levels of artillery. And this is the result. This is only the edge of it.
Russia has now shifted its attacks elsewhere, at least for now.
When you see this, how do you feel?
Super.
Great. I understand that our artillery is working, and our troops are working too, because there was both artillery and ground fighting. The units, in cooperation with other troops, were pushing the enemy across the river on foot.
Shattered Russian armour is scattered along this path through the woodland. On the ground, we can't move forward. The track is mined.
A real disaster for the Russians, but something that the Ukrainians now are saying here that means that the pressure is off this particular front for now, and that they believe that the Russians are focusing more of their efforts elsewhere.
Ukrainian soldiers pick over the debris of this victory, but the chilling truth is that many of their comrades have ended up like this. And while this is a success in the grinding war for Ukraine, Russia remains an immediate threat.
And they've asked us to get out of here with their military commander because they're worried that our cars are going to attract attention and therefore attract incoming. This is still clearly an extremely active area.
And one, as it was for the Russians, that's a considerable relief to leave. Sam Kiley, CNN, Bilahorivka.
Ukrposhta is Ukraine's national postal service, and it has been operating throughout the war. Despite the dangers of working in a war zone and massive damage to roads and rail tracks, it is still delivering pensions, parcels, mail, and aid supplies. Last month, it issued a stamp celebrating Ukraine's strong resistance. It pictured one of the defenders of Snake Island shouting defiance at a Russian warship. Igor Smerlensky is the Director General of Ukraine's National Logistic and Postal Service, and he joins us live now. So great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Alison. Hi.
You know, it's remarkable how Ukraine has been able to keep many of its central functions running throughout the war, and this includes your service, which is vital. I'm curious to hear how you and your employees continue making deliveries and stay safe. You know, I would imagine there are so many obstacles to overcome every day just so you can get those deliveries done.
Sure. I mean, I think safety is a relative term right now, but obviously we're trying our best to be safe. We start every day at 5 at 6 a.m., reassessing the military situation, assessing which roads we can or cannot take, where we can or cannot go. And we plan our routes, and that's how we keep our employees and the clients safe. We work with military to demine the places, to demine our branches, which have been occupied sometimes by Russian forces. So it's now become part of the daily work.
Is it true that you are on Vladimir Putin's kill and capture list of key Ukrainian leaders? If so, do you know why?
You never know for sure what's in his head, but I think every chairman or every executive of the top companies, the strategic company on his list, railways, posts, ports, etc. But I don't think we should take it in our head. We just have to keep operating and do the job that we do, and hopefully we'll win, and he no longer matters in the world politics.
You know, millions of people have fled Ukraine. How hard is it to keep employees at this point? Are you finding that as well, that you're knocking on doors to make deliveries and no one answers, or worse, you get to their homes and they're destroyed?
We have both. Obviously, we have local employees that know exactly what's happening. By the way, we are helping our citizens that left. We established a new service called Suitcase from Home. So all the refugees that left Ukraine, their relatives can send their stuff to them wherever they are, Italy, Poland, US. And just last month, I think we tripled our volumes. So they can have something from home, clothing, toys, everything. And in the places which have been destroyed, we are finding people. We are finding them in bomb shelters. Sometimes they live in bomb shelters. We are finding them in their new places. Or if, let's say, if they change the place where they live, they can obtain their pensions in their new location. So we are adapting to the situation on a daily basis and trying to make sure that people are receiving what they are receiving. I personally went to Donetsk and Lugansk region last week, and we delivered over 70 pensions to Severodonetsk, a city which has been without mobile connection or even without electricity, but we still delivered.
I understand your company issued a stamp. Tell us about it. How did you come up with it? And what's been the response to it?
I think the response has been great. It's now the symbol of our fight. On the stamp, yes, as you correctly described, there is a soldier that sends the Russian ship to go where it needs to go. And so we issued the stamp on April 12th, and April 14th, the ship was sank. So I think we got the message. You know, what's important during the post service, that once you send the message or send the letter, it's been received and delivered. So I think this time it's been delivered. And the reason this stamp is so popular, because it sends the sentiment that I think all the people in the world feel toward Russian forces. They need to go where they need to go. And by the way, on Monday, we will issue the new stamp called Russian Warship Done, just to celebrate the fact that it's now in the status of the submarine. And hopefully that's where the Russian military will be.
What's the biggest challenge that you face in your business?
I think it's containing emotions and making your decisions with the cold head. You see millions of people in this place. You see your employees killed. But nevertheless, I think every day we need to assess the situation and focus on the goal, on making sure that we deliver food, we deliver parcels, we deliver pensions to millions and millions of people. I think that's been the hardest part that I learned how to do, and hopefully we will have to keep doing it, not for a long time.
Well, you are certainly an example of a business that is literally just moving forward right in the middle of a war. Igor Smolensky, Director General of the Postal Service of Ukraine, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
The UK is introducing new legislation that could break the rules of its deal with the EU. Some say it also threatens to put peace at risk on the island of Ireland. We'll explain after this. Tensions are rising over Brexit again. EU officials are bristling after Britain said it would propose new legislation to let it ignore some of the terms of its Brexit agreement. The law would mean the government could set aside parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, a crucial part of the 2019 Brexit Accord. The EU says that would be unacceptable and would trigger retaliation. British officials insist they do want to reach a solution by talking. Ireland's leader tells a different story, though, claiming the UK is not sincerely engaging in talks with the European Union. He voiced his concern to CNN's Richard Quest.
It's time you started negotiating seriously and in a substantial way with the European Union. I mean, this is the treaty that you signed up to. The British government signed up to this, ratified it in Parliament, and now have misgivings in terms of the potential operation of this protocol, because let's not forget some aspects of this haven't been implemented yet. Grace periods, exemptions and so forth. But nothing can replace substantive professional negotiations between the European Union and the United Kingdom to deal with issues that have legitimately arisen in respect of the operation of the protocol, particularly raised by unionists within Northern Ireland, which we believe can be resolved through sensible negotiation.
Right, but they would say that there has been negotiation for the last 6 months to a year. There has been negotiation. The EU proposals are not acceptable to the British and vice versa, and therefore this is the way forward. They're not, of course, at the moment activating Article 16.
There hasn't been negotiation for the last 6 months.
They said there has been.
But they know there hasn't, de facto, because there was elections happening in Northern Ireland. Now, there were engagement prior to Christmas. And to be fair to Maros Sefcovic, the Vice President of the European Commission, he brought forward very significant advances. And he listened and he met unionist politicians and also industry and business in Northern Ireland. By the way, the protocol is advantageous now. It's working in favour of industry, business, jobs, agriculture in Northern Ireland. And most people in Northern Ireland want to retain access to the European single market.
Would you support a change in the protocol?
No, we're prepared as members of the European Union, through negotiations between the European Union, the Commission, Vice President and his team, and the UK government, to minimise the impact in terms of checks and so on of the operation of the protocol, which can be done with sensible engagement. It can be done, but this kind of on-off start, you know, the British government can't just keep talking to itself about this. It needs really to get into proper negotiations with the European Union.
The Northern Ireland Protocol was an attempt to uphold a delicate power balance. It ensures borders remain open between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, key to maintaining peace in the region. Aside from risking a trade war, some warn scrapping the protocol could lead to rising tension on the ground. Bianca Nobilo explains why.
All of the disruption of Brexit, arguably the thorniest challenge and least debated beforehand, was its effect on the island of Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol came into effect in 2020 to try and address some of these difficulties. It had two key objectives. Number one, protecting the EU's single market, which allows the free movement of people, goods, services and capital. Because Northern Ireland is part of the UK, separated by the Irish Sea, and Republic of Ireland is part of the EU. So this is now the only land border between the UK and the EU. The second thing was avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland. The removal of border checks was an important part of the peace process in recent decades, and there are fears that the restoration of a hard border here would have an incendiary effect on tensions between the Unionists, who want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, and the Republicans, who want unity with the Republic of Ireland. Plus, they had to find a way to mitigate the economic and social impact on people and businesses which move across this border frequently. So the way to square this circle ended up being customs and regulatory checks on the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, effectively creating a border in the Irish Sea, which has infuriated Unionists. So why does this matter? The Northern Ireland executive is in deadlock because of it. Unionist parties are refusing to re-enter government until major changes are made to this protocol. Because this assembly is based on power sharing, there must be both a nationalist representative and a unionist, and one cannot be in power without the other. So, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, there he is, says that he wants to get the government there back up and running. He's also arguing that the circumstances have changed dramatically since the protocol was agreed, namely the pandemic and a European war worsening a cost of living crisis. So he's threatening to override the protocol to make changes that are palatable to his government and unionist parties in Northern Ireland. And he says he'll do that unilaterally, saying that the UK would have a necessity to act if a compromise can't be found with the EU. But the EU has made it clear that unilateral action would be a breach of international law, which is generally not a good look for a head of state. And the EU has warned that taking that step could spell a trade war and/or legal challenges. And Sinn Féin, now the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly, has warned that the Prime Minister tearing up the protocol will destabilise Ireland.
Coming up after the break, the Twitter board is on Elon Musk's back, saying it'll hold him to his $44 billion deal. That's next. Welcome back. I'm Alison Kosick. Africa is making strides toward a more inclusive financial future. From fintech to free trade, the continent is seeing transformation, with the unbanked getting accounts and trade barriers falling. Maktar Diop, of the International Finance Corporation, sits down with our Connecting Africa host, Eleni Giokos.
The pandemic has seen an incredible acceleration in the fintech space. And I guess when you look at the African example, you know, in many ways, so many African economies have been at the forefront of pioneering solutions to bank the unbanked through fintech. Give me a sense of where we are right now.
This is just fantastic what's happening in Africa. A decade ago, when we were talking about fintech, about M-Pesa, the IFC invested in Safaricom, and people were saying, what are you doing?
That was a good call, yeah?
That was a good call, huh? And people were saying, what is these things called a fintech? Fast forward today, we have, of the 9 unicorns we have in Africa, 6 of them are coming from fintech. So fintech is doing great. In Nigeria, we have now 3 big unicorns in fintech. So the business is moving well. But most importantly, it has an impact on people's life and people's development. We have, as you know, financial inclusion, which is very low in Africa. Only 58% of people have accounts. And now with fintech, you have now people who can do transaction, buy.
You had foresight when it came to M-Pesa, and in fact there's been something that's been said that we haven't really seen anything riveting in terms of true disruptive technology since M-Pesa. Yeah. So what's the next M-Pesa?
Interesting things. The number of women in startups is much larger than people would have expected. And you see great ideas of young entrepreneurs And it's interesting, you see a mix. People who were in Europe or in the US coming back home and developing their business. People who never left Africa who are developing their business. And we are pairing also with MIT lab, and we're trying to do some innovation for development and try to see some of these innovation moving forward. So I think that it will help developing inter-Africa trade. But we need to make sure that everything which has been signed and said in the Africa Free Trade Agreement becomes a reality.
It's the financing institutions and it's the businesses that are going to ensure that the Continental Free Trade Area is actually, becomes reality. Are you excited about what you're seeing right now since it went live?
I see a lot of political will to do that. But I think would be the next step is to make sure that the private sector and businessmen are at the center of the African Free Trade Agreement. Encouraging to have at the continent-wide a dialogue between the private sector and the public sector so they can really exchange ideas on what are the challenges they're facing.
The Twitter board is pushing Elon Musk to complete his $44 billion deal for Twitter. As we've mentioned, the billionaire says it's on hold pending his concerns about spam bots. In a statement, the Twitter board said this: "We believe this agreement is in the best interest of all shareholders. We intend to close the transaction and enforce the merger agreement." Notice the word enforce there. Could legal action be on the way? Paula Monica has the latest now on this Twitter twist. So what do you think? Could legal action be on the way here?
I mean, it's possible, but obviously, Allison, it really all depends on what Elon Musk decides to do. There is that binding agreement to buy Twitter at $54.20 a share. Look at Twitter's stock price, and it's clear that Wall Street does not expect the deal to go through at that price. At last check, Twitter shares were trading below $38 a share. So I think Musk either is looking for a way out because of these concerns that should have come up if he had done real due diligence instead of impulsively trying to buy Twitter. But I think that there's also the distinct possibility that Twitter recognizes that Musk may be their only hope, if you will, and they might need to do a deal at a lower price. So instead of litigation, maybe Musk and the Twitter board go back to the negotiating table, realize that a lot of things have changed in just the past month, and maybe the takeover price is something below $54.20, but hopefully above $38.
It seems as if the board is trying to get a hold of this runaway train, AKA, this possible takeover of Twitter. Is there even a certain date in the SEC filing about Elon Musk's interest in the company to buy it? Is there a date that he either needs to buy it or get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, he has a binding deal. So if he does not want to go through with this offer at the current price and decides to walk away entirely, there is a $1 billion breakup fee, which is admittedly couch cushion change for Elon Musk. So not something that he probably would be too concerned about. I think the bigger question, though, Allison, remains, will Musk really want to buy Twitter, but just at a lower price? Or could he possibly look to start his own social media network if he is so inclined? He's got the cash to do it if he wants to start yet another company to go along with Tesla, SpaceX, Boring Company, and everything else that he runs.
Well, Paul, we'll have to watch Twitter to find out, right? And Paula Monica, thanks so much. And that's it for the show. I'm Allison Cossack. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Allison Cossack. Thanks for joining us. Connect the World with Eleni Giokos is next.
the battlefield to a courtroom in Kyiv, a guilty plea from a Russian soldier for crimes committed during the harrowing war in Ukraine. Buses carry hundreds of Ukrainians from the Azovstal steel plant, the last holdout in Mariupol. Debate on both sides as to their fate. Will they be interrogated as criminals or return home as heroes?
When you don't have money, she tells us, when you don't have a job, you don't have income, would you be able to eat proper food when there's no work?
Hunger haunts Afghanistan, a new report squaring blame on both the Biden and Trump administrations. I'm Eleni Jokos in Abu Dhabi. Welcome to Connect the World. And we start with the first guilty plea from a Russian soldier for war crimes committed during Russia's nearly 3-month-long war on Ukraine. It happened in a courtroom in Kyiv a few hours ago. The 21-year-old soldier was charged with killing a 62-year-old civilian in his days of war. He faces life in prison. The Kremlin spokesperson calls Ukraine war crimes charges unacceptable, outrageous, and staged. How today's guilty plea will impact the fate of Ukrainian soldiers who left the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol is still unclear. Now, Russia's defense ministry released video showing what it says are some of the nearly 1,000 Ukrainians who Russia says surrendered. The separatist leader in Russian-controlled Donetsk is telling Russian state media they should be tried in court. Ukraine is pushing for a prisoner of war exchange. Meantime, Russian airstrikes are pounding positions in Donetsk and Luhansk. This video shows the aftermath of a strike in Bakhmut, an important hub for Ukraine's military with a hospital that treats wounded soldiers. And here you see a 9-year-old boy wounded in a strike. Another reminder of the excruciating human toll of this war. Scenes like this leading many to accuse Russia of war crimes. And we have Melissa Bell connecting us today from the Ukrainian capital, and we have Suzanne Malveaux in Lviv in western Ukraine for us. Melissa, I want to start with you because you're in Kyiv and you've been watching this trial play out. And now we have a guilty plea from the Russian soldier. What more can you tell us?
A guilty plea, and that's just about as far as we were able to get here at this Kyiv courthouse. The hearing was suspended a short while ago, Eleni, because there were just too many journalists inside the courtroom, both foreign and Ukrainian, and it gives you an idea of the appetite there is for this trial, the first war crimes trial being held by Ukrainian authorities, by the Ukrainian judiciary since the war began. It is Vadim Shishimarin that we're hearing from. He entered a guilty plea. He did not take the opportunity, though, to make a statement today. Now, just to give you the bare facts of the case, to remind you, he is a 21-year-old Russian soldier on the 4th day of the war. What we understand is that what the prosecution is saying is that his convoy was hit. He and a group of other Russian soldiers escaped in a car. They saw an unarmed civilian on a bicycle on the telephone and shot him because they feared that the civilian might report them to authorities. Those are the bare facts of the case. Now, what's interesting, Eleni, is that we should be finding out more about exactly what went on that day, because what we have learned today is that tomorrow, when these court proceedings resume, we'll be hearing a man called by the prosecution, another Russian prisoner of war, called by the prosecution, who will be providing more details about exactly what happened that day in that car and the circumstances in which that civilian was shot.
All right, Melissa, really good to see you. Thank you so much. We also have Suzanne Malveaux in Lviv for us. And Suzanne, the Russians are calling this specific trial outrageous. And while this is on the go, the fate of those that have just been let out of the Azovstal steel plant, I mean, their fate lies in the hands of the Russians right now. What more are we learning?
Well, there certainly is a great deal of concern and fear among the family members of those who are being held by the Russians, and now new numbers, at least from the Russian side. The Russian defense minister saying that 1,000 of those Ukrainian military forces have been taken out of the steel plant, most of them held in a detention center that is not far from the front lines. They say about 80 of those people are wounded and a little bit more than 50 severely wounded. That would be the group in the hospital and the group that the Ukrainians would like at least to go ahead and try to negotiate with them, with the Russians for some sort of swap prisoner deal there. But there are a lot of questions in terms of whether or not that will really take place, whether or not that will happen. And what we've heard from the separatist leader of the Donetsk region is that they believe, and they are saying, although it is not verifiable, neither of those new numbers that we got from the Russians, that those inside of the plant now are the top commanders of the Ukrainian military. And this complicates things quite a bit if, in fact, it is true. This would not be an easy negotiation to have them removed or evacuated or rescued, whatever term they might use, to negotiate with the Ukrainians. That would not likely be an easy thing to do. And secondly, the separatist leader also saying that very likely they would stand trial for potential war crimes. And so this is not a group either inside of that steel plant or outside where their fate is known. And so there are a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and potentially it might not go in the direction in which those Ukrainian forces and their families would like.
Yeah, Suzanne, I mean, really interesting to see, the messaging from both sides. On the one end, the Ukrainians are saying this is a delicate time where there are, possibilities for negotiation. On the other side, the Russians are watching closely the trial that we're seeing playing out in Kyiv. To what extent will this complicate the ability for the Ukrainians to make an exchange in something quite imminent?
It complicates it quite a bit. I mean, you've heard from the Ukrainian President Zelensky, who's been trying to comfort his people and comfort these families by saying there is a process that is in place, that the Ukrainian officials, whether they are military or intelligence, are working with, overseeing the process, working with international mediators. But how much control and power they really have over this, it still remains a question here. And whether or not these are high-value targets and people that are inside of the steel plant certainly will make a difference. It will complicate the situation. And as we see this trial being played out here, what is taking place, whether or not the Russians, who they say they have their own investigative unit, will find these individuals guilty, as they see it, of war crimes or crimes against individuals who are friendly to the Russians in that Donetsk region, will certainly make a difference in terms of their future, their potential release, and that potential exchange with the Russian prisoners as well.
Yeah. Suzanne Malveaux, thank you so much. Melissa Bell, much appreciated. Good to see you both. It is now clear that one impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that it is strengthening NATO. Finland and Sweden each formally applied to join the NATO alliance on Wednesday. The two nations had long prided themselves on their neutrality, but Russia's aggression caused them to shift their views. The application process could take several months, but NATO's Secretary General says this is an important step in each nation's security.
Every nation has the right to choose its own path. You have both made your choice after thorough democratic processes. And I warmly welcome the requests by Finland and Sweden to join NATO. You are our closest partners, and your membership in NATO would increase our shared security.
So, Nina dos Santos, it is now official. Applications have been put through. Here's the reality. We know that Sweden and Finland have always had military that would be NATO compliant. They did that strategically. But there's a long process ahead, and of course, Turkey is creating a new challenge.
Yes, that's right. I spoke to Magdalena Andersson, the Prime Minister of Sweden, just yesterday, and she appeared to say that she was looking forward to more cooperation with Turkey. That's perhaps coded diplomatic language for we might be able to talk about how we can smooth this process and expedite it for a country like Sweden. So obviously the Prime Minister of this country, international diplomats appear to think that they could smooth things over with Turkey and press ahead with this momentous decision to say no to being neutral for the foreseeable future and yes to joining NATO. Here on the streets of Stockholm, that's prompted quite a lot of soul-searching, as I've been finding out.
For Anna Ladigina, who's just escaped the war in Ukraine with her mother and young baby, Stockholm means safety for now.
Here, it's so calm that people who are living here, hundreds really kilometers from this war, and you don't feel it right here. It's difficult to understand the situation until you're not in it.
Sweden has for years offered sanctuary to people like Anna fleeing conflicts across the world, unimpeded thanks to the nation's once cherished neutrality. But now that is about to change as the country prepares to join NATO alongside neighbouring Finland.
Every country has their own right to make their decisions, and we think this is better for the future to be a member in NATO for the security of Sweden and the Swedish people.
Sweden and Finland have changed their minds on NATO at lightning speed, but this isn't a decision that either side is taking lightly. For these Nordic neighbours, joining NATO means turning their backs on a deliberate policy of military non-alignment that has served them well for many generations. For NATO, it also means a much longer border with Russia to police. Russia has begun to talk down the significance of this expansion of the alliance, the exact opposite of Vladimir Putin's intentions. Public support for NATO membership was overwhelmingly high in Finland, but here in Sweden, the debate is more nuanced. 70-year-old Anita Salvin says that there's still room for a peacemaker in today's world order and that Sweden should continue to fulfill that role. Russia hasn't been to war with Sweden for 2 centuries, she says. The warnings about Russia are just NATO propaganda.
A very different history.
Anton Hamburg, an economics student in his 20s, says the decision has been rushed.
I don't think people should be scared that Russia is going to invade Sweden. I think that's preposterous. They're not going to invade Sweden.
Amid fears the Ukraine invasion could spark a bigger conflict, we meet Rainer Piernor, who fled his native Germany after the Second World War, first for neutral Austria before settling in Sweden 60 years ago.
Now it comes back all the memories and what could happen for those people.
So how do you feel about Sweden's move now to join NATO?
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, because nobody knows what will happen in the next 20 years. That is my concern.
Anna is also positive about NATO's expansion, just sad her country wasn't afforded its protection.
They have an opportunity to be safe and to protect their people. What's happening right now in our country, it may happen to any of us.
So as you can see there, Sweden, of course, has welcomed people, young and old, from conflicts that are very recent to ones that are the types of conflicts that this war in Ukraine is worrying people very much about. And NATO's expansion, hopefully, will be designed to prevent, Eleni.
Yeah. And look, Nina, and you're right, it is a big deal, especially for Sweden, because it's 200 years of neutrality. The messaging since the war began, when we started hearing Finland and Sweden could potentially join, is that it could be expedited and could happen relatively quickly. But Turkey might be a challenge. To what extent is that being discussed?
Yeah, it's being discussed enormously here behind closed doors here in Stockholm, not least because the ruling party that's coming up for elections in 4 months' time had a couple of key policy tenements, and that was, on the one hand, up until the start of March, absolutely no to NATO, and on the other hand, we will not negotiate with Turkey because we don't share, share some misgivings over differences on, say, for instance, the asylum that Sweden has given to people from the Kurdish community, people who Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, accuses of terrorist activities, and he wants some people handed over, he says. Also, the two countries have differences on an arms embargo, which is imposed by Sweden back in 2019 when Turkey had a military operation in northeastern Syria, again, against Kurdish separatists there. So they have differences. And also remember that Sweden has a big defence sector itself. Turkey is also trying to beef up its defence sector, particularly when it comes to unmanned combat drones. So there's a lot of business on the sidelines of this. There's probably negotiations about things that haven't yet come to the fore, but diplomats feel they can get over it. Certainly one thing that will help is the fact that the leader of this country in Finland will be heading over to Washington to meet with Joe Biden tomorrow at the White House. Eleni?
Absolutely. And importantly, as you say, it's the conversations that are happening behind closed doors that we need to try and find, you know, in terms of content and messaging. Nina Dos Santos, always good to see you. Thank you so much. And looking ahead on Connect the World, why the EU is pushing to break Europe's dependence on Russian energy. And a US watchdog report reveals just how responsible America is for the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. We're live from Kabul after the break. The leader of Hezbollah is expected to address supporters in the coming hours after his party's setback in Lebanon's election Sunday. It now remains to be seen whether the disparate parties can work together to turn around Lebanon's battered economy. Ben Wiedemann reports the results send a strong message.
Every vote counts, the saying goes. And in Lebanon, despite low expectations, perhaps change can come through the ballot box. With the official results finally in, it appears Hezbollah, which for the past 4 years led a majority coalition in parliament, has lost that majority. A blow to its prestige and a boon to the supporters of the October 2019 uprising against the political elite. The so-called revolutionaries often came to blows with Hezbollah supporters. These ashes are all that remain of what was a fist symbolizing the uprising of 2019 against the ruling elite. But Monday evening, when it was becoming increasingly apparent that the Hezbollah-led coalition might lose its majority in parliament, people, presumably supporters of Hezbollah, came and burnt that fist down. Hezbollah, which maintains a powerful and well-armed militia, has made clear it has red lines, says analyst Mohamed Haj Ali.
Do not try us. Do not touch upon these issues. We're not going to discuss the weapons issue. And the other side is raising the bar you know, when it comes to Hezbollah's arsenal, etc. So it seems, you know, we're back to the same level of polarization which created the violence that we saw in the past.
The 2019 uprising sputtered out as the country was gripped by the coronavirus pandemic, the economic crisis, and the port blast. But its legacy emerged in this election, with around 10% of the seats in parliament going to reformist candidates. Researcher Ibrahim Halawi sees signs of hope.
This has given the Lebanese society at least the idea that something is possible, that the system is not sort of ahistorical and inherent, that things can change.
That change, however, may not happen soon. It will take months of political horse trading for the perpetually squabbling politicians to agree on a new government. And more paralysis will only exacerbate the ongoing economic collapse. Change can't come soon enough. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Beirut.
So for many, the scenes are hard to forget. Chaos at Kabul airport last year, when America and its allies withdrew from Afghanistan. And since the Taliban took over the government, the country has plunged it into an economic crisis, and millions of people are starving. A new report by a US watchdog takes a hard look at what led up to all of this. And it found that America's decision to withdraw was, quote, the most important factor in the collapse of Afghanistan's military. The scathing report blames both the Trump and Biden administrations for leaving the door open for a swift Taliban takeover. CNN chief international anchor Christiana Mampour is in Kabul, where she's been seeing the harsh realities of the life in Taliban's Afghanistan. Christiane, I mean, to repeat this, is this the single most important factor in the collapse of the Afghan military? And when we see some of the details of this report, I have to say, when I speak to people in Afghanistan, this is what they've been feeling since the exit last year.
Do you know, Eleni, that's absolutely right. It's what I have heard from Afghans since that collapse, and even before, while the negotiations were going on, when Donald Trump had these negotiations practically unconditional with the Taliban, starting back in 2020, when the signal was given loud and clear that the United States is out of here and that they are going to be entirely out of here, not even leaving any kind of remnant force to do counterterrorism or the like. He created and he started that deal. Biden implemented it. It happened practically overnight, and it just left this whole place with a huge vacuum. And unfortunately, the Afghan National Army have been blamed. As you know, the United States, ever since the collapse back in August, kept saying, well, if the Afghans aren't going to fight for themselves, why should we? When they had been saying that if we're going to be left on our own after having been practically handheld for the past 20 years by the US and NATO, then what are we going to do? We're going to have to accept reality. So that confluence of events led to the situation that we're in right now, with the Taliban back, with poverty grinding because of international sanctions on this country, because of all sorts of issues regarding the Taliban, their adherence to the international community's laws and regulations and human rights, and this is playing out in real time. And the people, as always, it is the people who are paying for these geopolitical catastrophes, really.
Absolutely, and it's the women and girls. And you've asked such pressing questions to the Taliban leadership, who frankly have been walking circles around your questions, hiding behind religion or what they call processes. Young girls are not in school in terms of secondary school. What are the girls telling you right now? Do they believe that there's a chance they might be able to get back?
Well, first and foremost, the people who we've been talking to, and my report will air later today in a couple of hours, are extremely disappointed, extremely afraid. Many say they're very depressed. Many say they have lost hope. Many say that, they struggled and their parents struggled. They believed in Western promises, that this was going to be at least a place where girls could get their education and actually make a life for themselves. Now, what the fact of the matter is that the Taliban says government-run secondary schools are closed for girls. But, and it's so complicated here, those who can afford it can still go to secondary school at the still open private schools. Now, not everybody can afford it, and not all the private schools remain open, and even foreign NGOs, which have been supporting certain private schools, pulled out, many of them, and therefore those avenues are closed. For now, we know that the primary schools are open, we know that universities are open even for girls, despite the fact that many, if not most of them, operate on a segregated basis, so that girls and boys are not in fact studying at the same time. It is a terribly complicated situation, and what's even worse, what's made it even worse, is that this flow of edicts has been coming that are either enforced or not enforced. They have a chilling effect. I mean, it's very unclear exactly what's going on, except for these edicts that keep coming. The face covering has not been implemented, and yet today somebody said, well, there should be black head coverings and black hijab work, not even a colorful scarf like this. Girls have been pushing back on that. But I have watched what I call resistance education leaders, those who are stepping into the breach, giving some girls at least some opportunity to learn a trade that they might be able to use to support themselves and earn some money down the road. But this aspect of banning girls from going to high school is one that is going to haunt this government. And until it actually gets together and does fulfill the promises that it's made to us via our interview publicly, saying that it wants to have a better relationship with the US and the international community, it wants the sanctions removed, this is going to be the sticking point for sure, Eleni.
Yeah, absolutely. And just unfortunately, so many promises that have been broken since, we've been speaking and hearing from the Taliban. Christiane Amanpour, thank you so much. Really good to have you on the ground there. And still ahead on Connect the World, the United Nations Secretary General has a big warning about the global energy system and a new plan to improve it. And energy high on the agenda in Europe especially. It wants to be independent of Russian energy. Why the EU says it can't happen soon enough. That's all just ahead. The European Union is laying out more plans involving big money to lessen the bloc's need for Russian energy. As you know, the Kremlin is bankrolling its unprovoked war on Ukraine through the sale of its oil and gas. Now the EU says it wants to invest an extra $221 billion to speed up its transition to renewable energy. The EU Commission President says there's no time to waste.
Putin's war is, as we all see, heavily disrupting the global energy market. It shows on one hand how dependent we are on imported fossil fuels, but it also shows how vulnerable we are on relying on Russia for importing our fossil fuels, and therefore we must now reduce our, as soon as possible, our dependency on Russian fossil fuels.
All right, we must now reduce our dependency on Russian fossil fuels. Anna Stewart keeping an eye on all of this from London. Honestly, this is the one big conversation we've been having since the start of this war, is just to how to wean Europe off Russian oil and gas. And it's going to be tough because that means economic pain. But more money being thrown at this transition, it can't happen fast enough.
It really can't, and we've moaned now for weeks and months that the EU hasn't done enough over the years to, reduce its reliance on Russian energy. Well, here is a plan to do just that, and it's a very expensive plan, $220 billion. But overall, if it can wean itself off Russian energy, that should save it, it says, around $100 billion a year, because that's roughly how much it's spending on Russian energy. It's already cut out coal. The EU Commission would like to remove Russian oil from the picture this year. It's running into some difficulties there, and it is planning to reduce Russian gas by 2/3. Now, this plan is finding other gas, for instance, particularly for this year, looking a lot at LNG from elsewhere, from the US and Canada in particular, but also really ramping up and accelerating its plans for greener energy. And that's been really, really clear. And that's a lot of the investment we're talking about in terms of the $220 billion is in that. Also making it easier, removing some of the red tape in terms of creating new green energy projects, insisting that new public buildings in the EU will have to have solar panels on their roofs by 2025. It is a really comprehensive package. It goes a long way to meeting some of the issues here. The problem, as ever, with EU policies is it needs to be approved by all of the member states, and it needs to be implemented. And this will mean action and some sacrifice and compromise from all of the member states here. Eleni?
Yes, hopefully they'll all work together on this. I have to ask you, I've been watching what the oil major Eni has been doing and reopening ruble and euro accounts to pay for Russian oil and gas. Is there a sense of confusion in terms of whether European companies are able to still purchase at this juncture?
What's so interesting is we had a briefing on this yesterday, and actually the picture is even more confusing after a briefing from the EU than it was before, because it seems to actually contradict some guidance they gave out last week. Energy suppliers are in a really tough position right now. The Kremlin says they have to pay for their gas in rubles. There's a very elaborate, complicated scheme in which to do so, which may save some face and mean that they don't breach sanctions, but the guidance is really unclear. Interestingly, we've had news from a Finnish gas firm, Gazprom, today. Now, they say they will not pay for Russian gas using rubles or any kind of payment scheme that Gazprom has promoted here. And as a result, they say they are prepared that Russian gas could be cut off for them as soon as this weekend. That's always been the situation for Poland and Bulgaria. Eleni?
Anna Stewart, thank you so much. Always good to see you. Now, a stark warning from the UN Secretary General on the global energy system. Antonio Guterres calls the war in Ukraine a wake-up call to fix the system and to ditch fossil fuels. He's unveiled a 5-point plan to speed up the transition to renewable energy. You see it here. The big financial takeaway, an investment of $4 trillion in renewable energy each year.
The global energy system is broken and bringing us ever closer to climate catastrophe. Fossil fuels are a dead end, environmentally and economically. The war in Ukraine and its immediate effects on energy prices is yet another wake-up call.
Guterres there in a pre-recorded speech for the World Meteorological Organization's annual report, which says the world's oceans grew to their warmest and most acidic levels on record last year. Now, the US is easing sanctions on Venezuela in hopes it'll help the country's economic and political strife. To be clear, the US is not lifting the sanctions, just easing them, which will let the last US oil company in Venezuela, Chevron, negotiate with the Venezuelan state oil company on future activities. In return, political progress. President Nicolas Maduro's government began formal talks with the US-backed opposition Tuesday. Stefano Pozzebon joins us now from Bogota, Colombia, with the details. Stefano, really interesting. We've got a huge oil supply constraint coming through, and now we're seeing sanctions being eased in Venezuela, specifically assisting the likes of Chevron to open those talks. Why is this happening?
Yes, exactly, Eleni. Lots of moving parts in this story, but I think here the tit for tat, if you want, is political. Is a political deal that the White House is offering to Maduro. What is happening? The increasing prices that Anna, for example, was talking about has created an environment when the White House feels confident enough to offer Maduro the offer of easing some of the sanctions in exchange for political concessions. The state of the Venezuelan oil industry is so dire after more than 20 years of mismanagement and corruption that it's not likely that bringing Venezuela back into the oil market will morning to night immediately lower down the price of oil. What the White House is trying to get is a strong political concessions with Maduro at a time where easing sanction is made more convenient, maybe less politically costly because of the increased oil prices as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. And just as you said, the immediate outcome of this offer was a political one. We have seen the members of the opposition and representatives of the government of Nicolas Maduro to announce the return to formal negotiations yesterday with a picture that was posted at the same time on Twitter. And that means that the battle is now a political battle. Will Maduro actually comply? Will Maduro make further political concessions now that he knows that Biden is indeed ready to lift and to ease some of the sanctions at this moment? Eleni.
Stefano Pozzebon, thank you so very much for that update. All right, let's get you up to speed on some other stories that are on our radar right now. The men and women who play for the U.S. national soccer teams will now receive equal pay. The U.S. Soccer Federation announced the agreements Wednesday after years of pressure from female players. The Federation president calls the move historic, making it the first in the world to equalize FIFA World Cup prize money. It's about time. A new report says the China Eastern plane crash in March may have been deliberate. The Wall Street Journal says flight data suggests someone in the cockpit intentionally downed the jet, killing all 132 passengers and crew on board. It was China's deadliest air disaster in decades. North Korea's COVID outbreak is still growing. The country reports more than 230,000 new cases and 6 deaths between Monday and Tuesday. That brings the death toll to 62. Leader Kim Jong-un is reportedly holding meetings to analyze the crisis and the country's prevention policy. And just ahead, plenty of smiles and handshakes for Prince Charles and his wife Camilla in Canada. But this is no ordinary royal tour. I'll explain next. It's coming right down to the wire in the Premier League. Liverpool keeping their hopes alive with another victory. A reconciliation with Indigenous communities. That's the focus of a royal tour of Canada by Britain's Prince Charles and his wife, the Duchess of Cornwall. They're also marking Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. She is Canada's head of state. Before Charles and Camilla arrived Tuesday for their third-day tour, they faced calls for the monarch to apologize for the treatment of Indigenous children in Canada's residential schools. We've got Paula Newton live for us from the Canadian capital, Ottawa. Paula, really good to see you. I mean, here's the reality. A lot of these trips are turning out to be a moment of reckoning for the monarchy, to look inwards in terms of the treatment of Indigenous people. And not only in Canada, we've seen this playing out, but what is happening right now where you are?
Yeah, exactly, Eleni. And here's the issue, is that the world is getting a good look, a sober look at what the new monarchy will look like. And to that, the Duke and Duchess today here in the capital, as you say, that's following on comments, of course, the minute that they landed, Prince Charles making the comment that, look, he understands that this is a different future and that people must reconcile with what happened in the past. Of course, here, as you say, Indigenous peoples really wanting the Queen, the Crown, to also apologize, Eleni, for what was an incredibly dark past. You are talking about thousands of Indigenous children forcibly taken from their families and in many cases either neglected, abused, or in some cases outright murdered. And this is the legacy that Canada is dealing with now. Eleni, while the Catholic Church ran many of these institutions, the Anglican Church ran a few dozen of them, and there are people in this country as well calling for the Crown, and that means Prince Charles in this instance to really reconcile himself to that. Today he will take another stab at that, a long day of events, including meeting with Canadian Indigenous peoples. Eleni?
Paula Newson, thank you so much for that update. Liverpool are doing their part to keep the Premier League title race alive. The Reds won 2-1 against Southampton last night. That means we wait until Sunday to find out this year's champions. Manchester City, now know a victory against Aston Villa will seal the title. World Sports anchor Amanda Davis joins me. Amanda, there's lots of chatter over the last few weeks of permutations and goal difference, but now Manchester City know what they have to do on Sunday, and that means to win.
Yeah, absolutely. 37 games played for both Manchester City and Liverpool. Ultimately, it all comes down to one. The final fixtures of the season on Sunday. It is Manchester City with the 1-point lead as things stand. They have won more games over the course of the season. But fascinatingly, the fact they play Aston Villa, this is not just any Aston Villa. This is an Aston Villa side whose manager is Steven Gerrard, one of the most well-known, celebrated Liverpool players of all time. A lot being made about the role he could play in winning his former team the title. But the Liverpool boss today, Jurgen Klopp, has said he will not be speaking to Steven Gerrard ahead of the game. He is just going to hope that the result goes their way, his side for their part, hoping for the victory against Wolves.
I mean, it's such a narrow margin, isn't it? It's a narrow margin and something I'll definitely be tuning in for as well. We're going to a very short break and Amanda will be back with more details. Stay with us.
Hi, thanks for joining us. Welcome along to World Sport, live from London with me, Amanda Davis. On to the final weekend we go. One of the most fiercely fought Premier League title races in recent history goes right down to the wire. And despite the odds being against them, the Liverpool boss, Jurgen Klopp, says his side are going to give it a try. His side still in with a shout of taking it from Manchester City and, of course, claiming that historic quadruple of trophies after coming from behind to beat Southampton on Tuesday night. Liverpool knew they couldn't afford to lose their penultimate game to keep the title race alive, but did not get off to the best start. Nathan Redmond putting the hosts ahead within 15 minutes. And despite 9 changes to their starting lineup from last weekend's FA Cup final, Liverpool fought back there. Takumi Minamino in his first Premier League game since February, levelling things up before some concerted pressure told. And Joel Matip found a winner from a looping header on 67 minutes. Some had questioned whether Klopp's squad rotation was going to work. Afterwards, this is what he had to say.
Yeah, fantastic, absolutely, and fantastic. Actually, I'm so happy about the performance because it was a bit touching, honestly. It was like, wow, these boys, like having Ferraris in the garage, and then you let them out and they directly do like this.
Well, just a reminder of where we stand heading into Sunday's final games of the season. Liverpool, having closed that 14-point gap on Manchester City since January, now just a point behind heading into the final day. Klopp's side at Anfield against Wolves on Sunday. Manchester City go into their game against Aston Villa, knowing victory will do it, but of course, not any Aston Villa. Steven Gerrard's Aston Villa. Well, before that major piece of silverware is decided, later on Wednesday, it's the Europa League final. And whilst it is sometimes mocked as a competition for Rangers and Eintracht Frankfurt, should not be underestimated. A little bit earlier on, I spoke to CNN senior sport analyst Darren Lewis.
I was in Frankfurt to see them burn a West Ham side that judged them on their mid-table position in the Bundesliga in the semi-finals. Mighty Barcelona also made the mistake of underestimating the German side, just as another Spanish side did, Real Betis. But make no mistake, Frankfurt are a very good team, and they've produced some outstanding results under their head coach, Oliver Glasner, who only took over in July last year and initially managed only 1 win from his first 10 league games. It's also 50 years since Rangers' last Continental Trophy, the 71-72 Cup Winners' Cup. But there's some wonderful individual stories within the squad, not least the midfielder John Lundstrom, who has been outstanding for them since he joined on a free transfer from the Championship club Sheffield United last July, and Connor Goldson, who'd had a difficult time at his former club Brighton, but has been instrumental in Rangers' resurgence since his arrival in 2018. I think it's going to be a huge match tonight, Amanda, and it will also give inspiration to those teams outside the elite, that you too can come within 90 minutes of Champions League football and revive your past glories.
I mean, you mentioned the teams that Frankfurt have caused upsets against. How do you think it is going to go? Who's your money on?
I think my money's going to be on Frankfurt. You know, I was in, as I say, Germany for the tie in the last round, and they are a side that are mid-table in the Bundesliga, but they come alive in the Europa League. They suck you in, they attack fast and fluently down the wide areas. Look out for their impressive Japanese midfielder Daichi Kamada, their German right winger Ansgar Nauf, who scored home and away against West Ham, and their star man, Colombian Rafael Bor. He plays up front. He's got a knack of scoring big goals when it matters, but I wouldn't underestimate Rangers. They'll be looking to make their own history tonight. Their Dutch head coach, Gio van Bronckhorst, built superbly on the foundations left by his predecessor, Steven Gerrard, to get within 1 game of the Champions League. It's going to be a huge match. Both teams will give their all, but I just think Frankfurt will have the edge.
That was Darren Lewis for us. Now, the US Soccer Federation have announced they've reached a new landmark collective bargaining agreement with the US women's team that will pay them equally to the men's. The biggest news, the latest step on this very long journey, it includes an even split of World Cup prize money earned by both teams across the men's and women's tournaments. It is a huge announcement. The US women got only $4 million after winning their second straight title in 2019. In comparison, France got $38 million for winning the men's event a year earlier. In 2014, the US men's national team got $9 million just for reaching the round of 16. But under this new deal, US soccer will put 90% of the prize money from both the men's and women's World Cups into a pool, and the players will split it. US soccer president Cindy Cohn said in a statement, "No other country has ever done this. I think everyone should be really proud of what we've accomplished here. It really, truly is historic." These agreements have changed the game forever here in the United States and have the potential to change the game around the world. Now, it was Scottie Scheffler who won the Masters just a month ago and is firmly installed as golf's world #1, but he's not feeling any pressure and puts it down to one man. Find out who next.